Fort Worth is a city where the stockyards still run and the oil money never left. But did you know that one single family here is sitting on a collective fortune of over $500 billion? You heard it right, $500 billion. But that's not an isolated story. Let's take a look at 8 richest dynasties and the stories behind how they built their massive wealth empire. The wildcatters, the Disney deals, the billion-dollar buybacks, and the family feuds that belong on HBO. The stories you're about to hear are wilder than anything you'd expect from a place still called Cowtown. Let's count them down. 8. Brint Ryan, the tax kingmaker who lets his employees work from anywhere. Let's open with someone whose name you probably don't know, but whose firm almost certainly touches the finances of companies you interact with every single day. Brint Ryan is the founder and CEO of Ryan LLC, a global tax services firm valued at roughly $2.5 billion. And he has built one of the most quietly dominant corporate empires in North Texas by doing something that most people find spectacularly unglamorous: helping corporations recover taxes they've overpaid. That's the entire business model, and it works so consistently that Ryan LLC has now posted 34 consecutive years of revenue growth. 34. Not a single down year in over 3 decades across recessions, financial crises, and a global pandemic. Their 2024 revenue hit $1.24 billion, serving over 77,000 clients across 80 countries. The evergreen nature of tax compliance turns out to be an extraordinarily durable foundation for a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, because corporations will always overpay taxes and they will always want someone smart enough to get that money back. Ryan's Fort Worth footprint runs deep through his role as chairman of the University of North Texas System Board of Regents, a position that gives him significant influence over the state's educational trajectory and, by extension, the pipeline of talent flowing into the North Texas corporate ecosystem. His reputation as a political kingmaker in Texas, a major Republican donor whose relationships stretch across the state's most powerful business circles, means his influence reaches well beyond the walls of his firm. But here's the detail that makes Ryan genuinely interesting to a broader audience: his results-only work system, or ROWS. In an industry, accounting and tax consulting, that is famously rigid, hierarchical, and obsessed with face time, Ryan implemented a radical management philosophy that allows employees to work wherever and whenever they want, as long as the work gets done. No mandatory office hours, no performance theater, just results. The productivity and retention gains were significant enough that the model became a case study in modern management. For a man whose entire business is built on finding inefficiencies in complex systems, applying that same logic to his own organization makes a certain elegant sense. 7. The Moncrief family, the wildcatter dynasty, and the 101-year-old patriarch. Some fortunes are built with spreadsheets and algorithms. The Moncrief family, however, built theirs with drill bits and instinct over generations of Texas oil wildcatting that started when the business of finding oil was still equal parts science and gambling, and the men doing it were the kind of people who bet everything on their gut feeling about what was underground. W.A. Tex Moncrief Jr. spent decades on the Forbes 400, building an energy empire through Montex Drilling Company and Moncrief Oil, while adhering to a family philosophy his father Monty had established as law: operate only through sole proprietorships, never go public, never let outside shareholders anywhere near your business. That discipline kept the family's wealth entirely within their control for generations, and their success in the Barnett Shale natural gas field in the early 2000s, when most people their age were winding down, proved their wildcatter instincts were still razor-sharp even in a modernized energy landscape. Tex Moncrief died in 2021 at 101 years old. His family's estimated fortune sits at approximately $1 billion, and his philanthropic fingerprints are all over Fort Worth. The Moncrief Cancer Institute, the Monty and Tex Moncrief Medical Center, institutions that carry his name because he put real money behind them, not just his signature on a press release. And then the lawsuit started. Because here's what happens when a 101-year-old patriarch who has held a billion-dollar empire together through sheer force of will and personal authority finally passes. The family, freed from that gravitational center, starts pulling in different directions. Relatives have filed suits accusing each other of siphoning funds from family trusts. There are allegations of extracting signatures from family members who were no longer mentally capable of understanding what they were signing. The disputes involve ranch land, Colorado vacation properties, the kind of assets that are worth fighting over when the numbers are big enough. If you've watched Succession and thought this couldn't really happen, the Moncrief situation is a pretty compelling counter-argument. The dynasty isn't over, but it is in transition, and what it looks like on the other side of this legal chapter is genuinely uncertain. 6. John Goff, the man who saw the future. Here is a question that every investor asks themselves and almost nobody actually manages to execute. What if you sold everything at the exact top of the market, waited for the crash, and then bought it all back at the bottom? John Goff didn't just think about that question, he did it. And that is why people in Texas financial circles call him the Backsies billionaire. Goff co-founded Crescent Real Estate with his mentor, Richard Rainwater, himself one of the most important figures in Fort Worth financial history, the man who turned the Bass family's $50 million inheritance into $4 billion and built it into one of the most valuable real estate firms in the country. In 2007, Goff sold Crescent to Morgan Stanley for $6.5 billion. The timing was almost supernaturally precise. The deal closed just before the 2008 financial crisis vaporized the commercial real estate market. Then Goff watched the crash happen, watched the values collapse, and then, when the moment was right, reacquired Crescent Real Estate for a fraction of what he'd sold it for. The same company, his company, bought back at a discount that represented one of the cleanest examples of patient, contrarian capital deployment in recent Texas business history. His current portfolio through Goff Capital spans wellness through Canyon Ranch, aerospace, and energy through Crescent Energy, with assets under management exceeding $10 billion. His estimated net worth sits between $1.9 billion and $2.5 billion, and his Fort Worth presence extends from his membership in the Texas Business Hall of Fame to his endowment supporting business education at the University of Texas at Austin. The lifestyle details only add to the picture. The $6.5 billion Crescent buyout was reportedly sealed on the putting green of Goff's lakeside retreat, Mariposa del Lago, on Eagle Mountain Lake, which is the kind of setting that makes a $6.5 billion handshake feel appropriately cinematic. And he owns Greystone Castle Sporting Club, a 6,000-acre ranch in Mingus, Texas, where guests hunt exotic game and stay in an actual castle. Because if you're going to be a Texas billionaire with a sense of humor about it, you might as well own a castle. 5. Stephen Udvar-Hazy, the refugee who invented an entire industry. There is a version of Stephen Udvar-Hazy's life that, told quickly, sounds almost impossible. He fled communist Hungary as a teenager. He took his first airplane ride in a Russian-built DC-3 at age 11 and never recovered from the experience. He landed in America with very little, figured out that airlines needed planes but couldn't always afford to buy them outright, invented the commercial aircraft leasing industry to solve that problem, and eventually donated $66 million to the Smithsonian Institution. Enough to put his name on the building that now houses the Space Shuttle Discovery. That's not a career trajectory. That's a myth that happens to be documented. Udvar-Hazy founded International Lease Finance Corp. And later Air Lease Corp., building a fleet management operation that now carries a valuation around $16 billion. His business model, leasing jets to airlines rather than requiring capital purchases, provided the liquidity that made the rapid global expansion of air travel in the late 20th century economically viable. Airlines that couldn't afford to buy a 747 could afford to lease one. The math worked. The industry grew around it. And Udvar-Hazy, who understood the economics of that gap better than anyone, grew with it. His estimated net worth sits between $4.4 and $4.6 billion, and his residence in Westlake, one of the wealthiest communities in the United States, places him in a Tarrant County enclave that also benefits from proximity to American Airlines and Lockheed Martin, making the geography strategically coherent for an aviation titan. He is also, notably, a certified commercial pilot for multiple jet types. The man who built a $16 billion fleet management empire can personally fly the aircraft in it. That detail alone deserves a moment of appreciation. His self-made score of 9 out of 10, the highest category in Forbes' methodology, reflects a story with no inherited wealth, no family connections, and no safety net. Just a refugee kid who fell in love with airplanes and figured out how to turn that love into one of the most consequential business models in the history of transportation. 4. David Dean Halbert, the serial entrepreneur who revolutionized AI usage. David Dean Halbert is the kind of entrepreneur who makes you wonder what the rest of us are doing with our time. Before founding Heiress Life Sciences, a biotech company that uses artificial intelligence and gene sequencing to predict how individual cancer patients will respond to specific treatments, he built Advanced PCS, a pharmacy benefit manager, took it public, and sold it to Caremark for $7.5 billion in 2004. Then he started again from scratch. Heiress Life Sciences went public on the NASDAQ in June 2025, and the IPO event turned Halbert into a multi-billionaire with an estimated net worth now ranging between $2.5 billion and $4.9 billion. He directly owns 43.4% of the company. The platform's revenue hit $412 million in 2024, and while Heiress is currently operating at a loss, investing heavily in the AI infrastructure required to make its cancer prediction models accurate and scalable, the market's willingness to reward that bet is a clear signal of where healthcare is heading. Here's what Heiress actually does, because it's worth understanding. Instead of treating all patients with a given cancer type using the same protocol, their platform analyzes the molecular profile of an individual tumor and predicts which treatments are most likely to work for that specific patient. The AI isn't replacing oncologists. It's giving them information that didn't previously exist at the point of treatment decision. Reducing the trial and error cycle for cancer patients is not just a compelling business proposition. It's the kind of application that makes the $2.5 to $4.9 billion valuation range feel almost beside the point. His residence in Colleyville, recently ranked as the 47th wealthiest suburb in America, with average household incomes of $265,831, places him at the center of Tarrant County's expanding tech elite demographic. And the pattern of his career, using the proceeds from one successful exit to fund a genuinely ambitious scientific bet, is exactly the kind of old money fund's new science story that Fort Worth is increasingly writing for itself. 3. The Horton family, America's largest home builder. When Donald R. Horton founded D.R. Horton, Inc. in Fort Worth in 1978, the American residential construction market was not looking for a disruptive new philosophy. It got one anyway. Horton's approach was built on decentralization, empowering local managers to make product and pricing decisions for their specific markets rather than pushing a one-size-fits-all national strategy. And that flexibility, compounded over decades, turned D.R. Horton into the largest home builder in the United States. The numbers are staggering. $36.8 billion in sales in the 2024 fiscal year. More than 1 million homes built since the company's founding. Operations across 126 markets in 36 states. The company's mortgage arm, DHI, is the second largest lender in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, creating a vertical integration that captures revenue on both the construction and the financing of every home. A flywheel that accelerates with every new resident moving into the region. Donald Horton died in May 2024 at 74, passing the legacy to his sons Reagan and Ryan, each of whom holds a greater than 10% stake in the company, a combined family position worth approximately $5.9 billion at current valuations. The succession appears orderly, which is not something every family on this list can say. But here's the detail that reveals how far the Horton family's influence actually extends. In 2018, D.R. Horton won a case at the United States Supreme Court regarding mandatory arbitration agreements, specifically whether companies could use them to prevent employees from pursuing class action lawsuits. They won. That ruling didn't just protect D.R. Horton's internal legal strategy, it fundamentally reshaped American employment law for companies across every industry. Think about that for a second. A Fort Worth home builder in a Supreme Court case, changing the legal landscape for employers nationwide. That's a level of institutional reach that goes well beyond building houses. 2. The Bass family, the billion-dollar Disney story. The Bass family story begins, as so many great Texas fortunes do, with oil. But it doesn't stay there, and that's what makes it genuinely fascinating. Descended from the legendary wildcatter Sid Richardson, the four Bass brothers, Sid, Edward, Robert, and Lee, inherited a petroleum legacy and proceeded to do something with it that most old money families never manage. They professionalized it, diversified it, and turned it into something structurally more interesting than where it started. The critical enabler of that transformation was a man named Richard Rainwater, the financial genius the family brought in around 1970. Rainwater took the family's $50 million inheritance and expanded it to more than $4 billion during his tenure. A feat that involved identifying deep undervaluation in the Walt Disney Company in the 1980s before most institutional investors had caught on, and shepherding an investment that yielded billions when Disney's subsequent transformation under new management sent the stock into the stratosphere. That Disney bet alone is one of the great examples of contrarian value investing in American corporate history. Each brother has since managed his wealth through a separate family office, which means the Bass fortune doesn't move in one direction. It moves in four simultaneously. Robert Bass, with an estimated net worth between $6.1 and $6.3 billion, built TPG, one of the world's most prominent private equity firms. Sid Bass has maintained the oil and real estate foundation. Lee focuses on energy and ranching. And Edward, perhaps the most eccentric of the four, put $200 million into Biosphere 2, the sealed ecological experiment in Arizona that attempted to simulate a self-sustaining planetary environment for a crew of scientists. Whether you view that as visionary science or spectacular eccentricity probably depends on your tolerance for grand ambition, but it is undeniably not boring. Their most visible Fort Worth contribution is Sundance Square, a 35-block mixed-use development that is effectively the city's downtown heart. When other American cities were watching their urban cores hollow out in the late 20th century, the Basses invested in Fort Worth Center and reversed the trajectory. Add their patronage of the Kimball Art Museum and the Amon Carter Museum of American Art, and you have a family that didn't just accumulate wealth in Fort Worth. They physically rebuilt the city around themselves. 1. The Walton family. $500 billion and a fatal car accident. Here's where the number gets genuinely difficult to process. The Walton family's collective net worth, as estimated by Bloomberg for 2025, is $513.4 billion. That is not a family fortune. That is a sovereign wealth fund with a family attached to it. And sitting at the personal apex of that figure is Alice Walton, Fort Worth resident, world-class art patron, and as of early 2026, the wealthiest woman on the planet, with an individual net worth of approximately $134 billion. The source of all of it is Walmart, the world's largest company by revenue, which the Walton family collectively owns roughly half of through vehicles like the Walton Family Holdings Trust. Between December 2024 and December 2025, Walmart stock appreciated by approximately 20%, driven by aggressive expansion in digital commerce and retail media advertising. That single year of stock performance added nearly $100 billion to the family's collective holdings. Not total wealth. Added in 12 months. Alice Walton's Fort Worth connection runs through decades of residency and deep engagement with the city's cultural and healthcare infrastructure. She previously owned the Rocking W Ranch in Millsap, a 1,432-acre property considered one of the premier cutting horse facilities in the country, listed for $19.75 million in 2015 when she refocused her energy on her art initiatives. Those initiatives include the Art Bridges Foundation and the Alice L. Walton School of Medicine, both of which use Fort Worth as an operational hub and both of which represent a vision of philanthropic capital deployment that goes well beyond writing checks. Now, here's where the story gets complicated, because no honest account of Alice Walton leaves this part out. In 1989, she struck and killed a 50-year-old pedestrian with her vehicle in Fayetteville, Arkansas. No charges were filed. In 1998, she was arrested for DUI, and during the arrest reportedly asked the officer, "Do you know who I am? Do you know my last name? Her legal team, described at the time as an Arkansas Dream Team, couldn't prevent a conviction on that charge, and a 2011 arrest in Weatherford, Texas, was eventually expunged after the statute of limitations expired and the arresting officer became unavailable for testimony. These are documented public record, and the question they inevitably raise, whether wealth provides a kind of legal insulation that the rest of the population doesn't have access to, is one that Fort Worth, like every city that hosts this level of concentrated capital, has to sit with. The art museums are extraordinary. The medical school is real. The philanthropic commitment is not performance. And the legal history is also real. And it happened. And the contrast between those two things is precisely why the Walton story is more complicated than a simple "world's richest woman" headline ever captures. And there you have it. 8 richest families that practically own Fort Worth. Which one impressed you the most? Let us know in the comments. And for more such interesting peeks into how the global wealth is prospering, take a look at global status.